And it's not just big furry things. The New England Wildflower Society's vision that all native plants, again this is from the SSC handbook, that all native plants of New England region exist in vigorous populations within healthy, balanced natural ecosystems. So basically what we should be doing as a conservation community should, instead of just a bit of a negative view in a sense as avoiding extinction, it's critical, but it's not enough. We should be giving the world a positive and proactive vision of what success looks like, which is species out there, thriving in their natural environment, at or around their natural carrying capacity, as integral parts of fully functioning ecosystems. And that's a vision which we can all strive for. So what I'm going to do now is say what that fully conserved species actually looks like. What does that mean? And then, as I said, a proposal that we should develop a system for defining and measuring that conservation success. So developing a green list of species to build upon and complement the red list, and I'll explain what I mean by that. So developing a common vision, again it can be for plants as well as for animals. This came out of a series of publications over quite a long time, culminating in a publication by Redford et al. Involving various people, including people like Simon Stewart, saying that a fully conserved species has multiple populations distributed across the historic range in ecologically representative settings. It's the 3 R's. It's representative, replicate populations within each setting, and then resilience across the range to allow for adaptation for changing circumstances. So it should be populations which have got gradients sort of north to south, up and down, so that it's resilient to climate change, for example. And within that, each of those populations should be self-sustaining, demographically and ecologically, genetically robust and healthy. And if we get that, then we've got a pretty well-conserved species. Our planning also has to recognise the importance of species to people and local cultures, partly because it just should anyway, and partly if we want this to be viable and self-sustaining in the long term. And the vision statements often do that. So, for example, the final part of the North American bison vision statement is in inspiring, sustaining and connecting human cultures. The Guanaco one, and in harmony with human activities. And our New England flowers, that the citizens of the region are actively engaged in the conservation of New England's native plants while enjoying native plants in the wild and in their own gardens. So a lot of this is also developing those human species links as well, or developing and maintaining them. So how do we assess progress towards this, to our vision of fully conserved species in a way that, like the red list, is scientific, transparent and replicable? The red list has been hugely successful in drawing attention to species facing extinction. It's rigorous scientifically, it's objective, and the world recognises that. And that's why it's referred to with huge respect by member states, governments and non-governments alike. And so how do we do that to measure success as well? Because the trouble is that the red list stops at least concern, and that covers kind of a variety of sins, from things that really are thriving and doing very well to things that actually we still have a little bit of worry about. These species here are all least concerned species on the red list. So they're quite a long way from being extinct in the wild. They're not about to drop off the twig under the red list criteria. But all of these are also somewhat distance away from being fully conserved. And all of them need quite a lot of intensive conservation actions to make sure that they're maintained and in some cases recover range as well. So we need a system to assess a species on a spectrum to being fully conserved, building on the red list with a potential green list. The reason is that we'll expand on the red list to show success in conserving species. It will also help species planners by providing a roadmap for steps needed to get from just the sort of the pinker end of the red list through to fully conserved. And also, again, to promote this optimistic and inspirational view of conservation. So, what we do, and this is very provisional at this stage, but this is just to get across to you the concept that I'm trying to say here. We can quantify a range of states from extinct, and somebody had a nice little pointer here. That works, okay. From extinct here, so this is the standard red list, to least concern, but this can then grade in some way to a green list. So species that are here on the red list would be considered unconserved. Then, and I say these terms are highly provisional placeholders. They're just to give you an idea of a concept. And no criteria, and I assume these names will probably change if this goes ahead, but it's just to get you an idea that things that are near threatened are sort of barely conserved, and then right through to our fully conserved, meeting all of those criteria that I described earlier. What I want to do is just give two examples of species which look very different on the IUCN red list and a potential green list towards fully conserved. The saltwater crocodile is least concern on the IUCN red list. Down here in Australia, we've got a stable or increasing population of about 150,000 adults, and there's also a couple of good populations on the west coast of India and around New Guinea. But it's extinct across pretty much all of this area, except a few places where it's pretty much ecologically extinct. So little bits here, but pretty much gone, or on the brink of being gone, throughout a large proportion of the rest of that area. So although the species is not about to go extinct, it's still a very long way from meeting all those criteria of being fully conserved if we go down a green list. Another example would be the North American bison. It's near threatened on the IUCN red list, so it's not in imminent danger of extinction. There's more than 500,000 bison out there. It's a fabulous example of successful recovery, as we heard from Christian Samper's plenary on the first night here. But only 5% of those are in conservation herds. This is the numbers of bison. These ones are in basically commercially managed herds for meat. These ones are in ecologically functional populations out in the wild. So from the sort of early 1900s onwards, we've got them hanging on there, but they're a long way from being fully conserved across a lot of their range. Most of that dotted line groups are in herds of less than 400 animals, and 95% of them are in private herds managed for meat production, where they're essentially performing a negligible ecological role. So we need ecological restoration before we can say they're fully conserved on a green list, even though they are saved on a red list. Now the IUCN red list criteria, they're clear, they're rigorous, they're transparent, and they're applicable to all species. It's a brilliant piece of work to work that all out. We want to do the same thing for a green list. So what we're recommending is that the SSC conducts an international scientific consultation process in much the same way they did for the red list, to develop consensus and rigorous criteria for our green list. The SSC and its partners then start using that to code species to this new system at global scale, and then countries could start to do the same within their own national borders in combination with existing national red list programs. And this is included in motion 48, so I would encourage you to vote. So finally, the green list process gives us an optimistic vision for conservation in the future, in which the planning, if it goes ahead, should result in species being integral parts of functioning systems, important for their own sake, important for supporting ecosystem services, sustaining human cultures and well-being as well, all as part of a rich, thriving world for humans and non-humans alike. Thank you.
Okay, so why don't we move on to a panel discussion? We haven't had an opportunity for questions, so we may want to begin. If I can have the speakers come up here, and maybe have the microphones on. I don't know what Skype opportunities we have.
I don't know. I don't know.
Okay, Anya's working on that.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, as I said, we haven't had the opportunities to really ask questions of the speakers, but let's perhaps begin with some questions, then kind of move on to the implications of what this discussion has been about. Clearly, species planning has moved forward very dramatically over the last few years, and I think the presentations we've had really kind of lay some of those options out. And what we've seen today in these presentations is, again, moving from single species to looking at whole portfolios, moving beyond red listing into green listing, a lot of opportunities. So let me turn it over. Questions from the floor? So let me begin with one. And maybe this is to Mark and Christoph. How does one balance all of those different stakeholders as one tries to develop a single common plan?
Yeah, it's a very difficult business. It's quite obvious and common sense that if you want to plan for a species, you need to include all those people who, or representatives of them, who are affected by that planning or live with the species. That's the easy bit. The question is how far you go, because clearly there are physical limits to how many people you can have in a meeting and how many you can organise. And of course there's a difference if you're planning for a species range-wide, i.e. across everywhere it lists, or maybe at the regional level, several countries, or at the national level. Clearly the stakeholders in those different levels will be different. So you have to strategize and get the right ones at each level. But there is no doubt that you cannot probably in some situations have absolutely everybody who should be there. And I think you probably have to have it in a multi-stage process. But to date, I don't know of anywhere where that's had to be done. And it'd be a very interesting thing to test.
Yes, I think it really depends on the case as well. I've not done too many species conservation planning exercises. I've done two. One for African penguins, which was quite difficult because there were stakeholders that were really opposed to developing this strategy in the room, and it was a very transparent and very open process where everybody was invited, everybody was able to come. If they didn't come, well, we couldn't help it. And the other one for lemurs was very easy because people were all very much along the same lines. It was really a very smooth process, and there was almost no balancing work to be done because everybody recognized the severe threat that lemurs were all under and tried to really be very helpful and we got it done really smoothly and quickly. So it depends on the situation in each case.
Can I just add to that? The situation that Christoph referred to with the penguins, you have to acknowledge that if you're going to invite all stakeholders defined as people with an interest in the species, you may have people who are dead against the conservation program if he's going to increase the numbers of that species. And this is particularly the case with large carnivores living on outside protected areas. People may say, well, the last thing you want is more wolves. And so the workshop has to try to accommodate that, and that's where it requires great skill and facilitation to at least get everybody under some form of common agreement before you move forward for planning. So this is a real issue, but in the interests of, I guess, democracy and your results are going to actually succeed, you have to go through that stage, which can be very difficult.
Do we have a microphone?
Yeah. Okay.
And just to add a point from the swordfish planning. So swordfishes are all listed on CITES. One is listed on Appendix 2 for the purposes of aquarium supplying. So we actually have an aquarium supplier at the workshop as well. I feel that if people are really bought into the process and sort of move forward with it, then we really do have to try and include everybody.
I'm back to the one plan approach philosophy. I'm glad you called it philosophy because I'm trying to see how it can be applied in the situations that I can think of. Like I was the head of the elephant program in Kenya for quite some time, and it's an endangered species. And it would be nice to apply this philosophy, this integrated conservation plan for the species both inside and outside its range. Whether it is possible under all conditions of management and engaging all parties and all available resources, it is very hard. John, WCS, was one of the sponsors of some of the programs. Mark Stanley Prize was, and the money they gave us to do specific jobs was to do that job. So the money he gave me was to do specific jobs. The money he gave me was to do specific jobs, and so on. And there were other people outside who had their money were doing specific jobs, and you could not mix all these resources because we were not allowed. So how we can get all the resources, put them together with all this diversity of stakeholders, have collective action, communication, and so on. With some of the people making a lot of money out of elephants, others suffering from elephants, it's very hard to put them in the same room. So how this can work, I don't know. So it's a good philosophy, but when it comes to application, it could probably apply for species that are not controversial, like a small frog in a pond somewhere, or a butterfly or something like that.
Thanks, John. Very nice to have a question from you again after many years. Well, you're absolutely right, but I think obviously elephants are, if you like, exceptional because of their interest and, of course, the damage they can cause. And I think also the situation, as in Kenya, where you have a lot of populations that are all split up, relatively isolated now, each with its own problems and potentials. You probably have to do your planning within the context of an overall national policy, which would state something like, we want to keep so many elephants, or we want to keep elephants for the purpose of tourism, but not with our public bearing unacceptable costs. So I think it would be very surprising if you did planning like this for a species like the elephant in the absence of an overriding national policy, which would give you some guidelines.
Right.
Well, and maybe mine as well, but a few things like that.
Yeah, let me just add just a little something there, because I think John has identified sort of a real challenge as you move beyond a very specific goal of trying to avoid extinction into a broader vision of ecological role within a social and economic context. So the number of stakeholders becomes just much larger.
Yeah, Margaret Christopher from Saltwater and talking. So I'd like to speak about the African paper that Christoph was talking, and just say that we've been through the process of putting together a biodiversity management plan. And we had the big process for the 70 people. I think the challenge point then is managing the people's expectations and the representation that comes thereafter. And we're in that phase, so we have got over the initial hurdle. And I believe the model we put in place is working, it is representative, and I think that we're not naive. We are in a situation where we have a real issue with fishing and other issues, but we believe in the process, and I think we're on the right road, and we would like to share more with the IUCN as members. So thank you for this.
Yeah, thanks, Margaret. I would definitely agree. It's a brilliant management plan, despite the initial difficulties with some stakeholders opposing to it. It was very inclusive, and it was signed off by everybody in the end, and it's now almost signed off by the South African government as the first ever species biodiversity management plan in the country. So that's really great. I think Caroline has joined us. So that's Caroline Lees.
Not really that big.
Hello, Caroline, can you hear us? She can hear us, but we can't hear you, unfortunately, for the time being, but we're working on it.
We have, in the meantime, we have a question.
Oh, we have a question in the meantime, yes, please.
No, I'm Jenny Gray, I'm from Zoos Victoria, and we participate in the Tasmanian Devil program. But really to say, I think the huge value